Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Not too much of a burden. We always worry that February could be snowed out, but not this year. Welcome to the second of our 2018 winter lectures. I'm Louis Bauer, Director of Horticulture at Wave Hill. On behalf of Executive Director and President Karen Meyerhoff and our board, I'd like to welcome you to our Horticulture Lecture Series. I want to thank the Friends of Horticulture Committee with Chair Donna Raftery, who host the series, and all the sponsors and underwriters listed on the program. They make these evenings possible. I'd also like to thank New York School of Interior Design for this very nice space we use. As always, I have a little show and tell. This month I decided with a full house, I wanted the people in the back row to be able to see our Echeveria purpurescens. We don't see these in our climate blooming, but in the cactus house there are a number of them with these big chartreuse panicles blooming right now. Usually in February I bring lots of tiny little South African bulbs with dainty flowers that you have to come up here to see up close, but I'm going to welcome you at the Palm House in the next few weeks to see all those bulbs. It's really quite a show. Tonight we are lucky to have Sarah Raven, a woman of many talents. She has worked as a doctor at the Royal Sussex Hospital in Brighton and is now a broadcaster, teacher, and writer. Since the publication of her first book, The Cutting Garden, she has led the way over the last 2 decades in introducing a new kind of productive gardening which fuses intense color, elegance, and doability, bridging all kinds of gardening from dark, rich dahlia glories to subtler, smoky, modern colors of poppies, roses, sweet peas, and all kinds of vegetable deliciousness. She runs her own gardening and cookery school at Perch Hill in East Sussex and is the author of many books. We have 4 of them for sale out at the entrance tonight, and Sarah will be happy to sign them. We expect this is probably the most popular of them, The Cutting Garden, Growing and Arranging Garden Flowers, but we have 2 of her cooking books and another cutting garden journal out there. Tonight's talk will be followed by a few questions and a reception around to the right as you leave the hall, where Sarah can sign your books as well. So please welcome Sarah.
Thank you, everybody, very much for being here. It's lovely on this extraordinary spring day that we've had the last couple of days. A bit bizarre, but I'm not going to make Trumpish jokes about that. I'm here to talk about the cutting garden and about growing flowers for picking. And I'm going to start with this slide because that person down there is me. At the age of 3, already picking flowers. So I started early. This is my twin sister, looking very bemused, and she continues to be rather bemused by the whole thing of flowers. This is in the same house, and I'm afraid this is here for pure fashion reasons. This was two years later, but this house was an important part of why I grow flowers, really, and vegetables. It's in a town called Asolo in the Veneto, just in the foothills of the Dolomites. And there were incredible wildflower sites there always. And my father was a botanist. He died when I was 17, sadly. But he, from a very, very young age, from when I was 3 or 4, would take me off every weekend when I was at school, botanizing with him in the UK, but also a lot in Europe. And he was a classicist, actually, at Cambridge, but he was also a really fantastic botanical illustrator. And he, in fact, left me, when he died, the whole British flora that had been painted by his father and him, every single plant in the British flora. And it's one of those sort of things that I don't really know what to do with, because it's 17 volumes this big. And not all of them as good as this. My grandfather was not such a good painter, but my father was a very good painter, painted always with a microscope. It's sort of one of those things that they still sit in boxes rather than on the wall. But anyway, it was an incredible bequest that he gave me, not just practically in terms of this collection, but also what he gave me in terms of loving plants and learning Latin and knowing about botany, really, rather than garden plants from an early stage of my life. So this is in Rhodes with my father when I was, 8 or 9. So these, as many of you who are florists will know, are anemone coronarias. So they're what have now been bred to be the big florist anemones. And they now come in an incredible range of colours. But seeing sites like this was something that I found terribly exciting from when I was very young. And this, in fact, was in my parents' garden where they bought some back and planted them into the grass. It doesn't look like that now, but it was a spectacular thing. And these are Ranunculus asiaticus on Crete. So this is, again, the parent of the thing, that the plant, the cut flower that is so fashionable at the moment, the double Ranunculus. But actually these single varieties are coming back into fashion very much, sort of simpler single species varieties. And then this is Lupinus pilosus in the Omelos gorge, or plain, just above the gorge, right at sort of the Hania end of Crete, with Euphorbia Wolfenii growing through it. So these were sites that I very much spent my childhood and early teens with my dad pottering around, finding orchids and wild iris, etc. And then closer to home, of course, the UK classic, the bluebell. And this was always a real sign. When the bluebells were out, we would start going off every weekend. My father had the most appalling, horrible Japanese car called a Simca. And it was like a tin can, but off we'd potter with our ham rolls to go botanising from when the bluebells were out. It was sort of pretty much a weekend occurrence. And closer to home too, this extraordinary magnificence of lady orchids. Lady orchids are one of our rarest orchids in Britain. And they look like this. They look like ladies in their ball gowns, all stacked on top of each other. Now, normally you have sort of an armed guard standing by one lady orchid. So when we came across a site like this in a woodland in Kent, which obviously I can't tell you where it is, it was a moment for real jubilation. And then the Burren limestone pavement in Ireland was also, I spent a lot of time with my father there, and because it's limestone, there's incredible variation of botany there, from sea spray tolerant things like this geranium, sanguinium, to again incredible orchids in all the little crevices. And the thing that's going to be out soon in the Thames Valley, which is Fritillaria meleagris, the snake's head fritillary, which when you see it like that, you can see why as a young child you might get rather hooked on flowers. And then up in the Hebrides, which is one of my favourite parts of the world, apart from Crete, this is a sea stalk in the Hebrides, just where Adam, my husband, and Tom, my stepson, who's also here, have a place. And there's incredible wildflowers. And it, to be honest, doesn't often look quite as Bahamian as this, but you do have coral white sands, and on a beautiful day you do get that blue. And you get wonderful, delicate things like the harebell and bedstraws. So that was the sort of nature that I was exposed to from an early stage in my life. But I was brought up in this very pretty Queen Anne house just outside Cambridge, because my father taught at Cambridge, with a lot of self-seeding and lots of things like this, just foxglove self-seeding into the hedges, and quite relaxed gardening. My parents just gardened it themselves, so it was, relatively untidy, but it was full of interesting plants that they'd brought back from the Mediterranean. So they were really big champions of the euphorbia, and things like anchusa off to the left, and alliums that they then, rather shamefully in a way, collected in the wild. You wouldn't do that now, and bring them back. And then this iris that they found on Corfu, this nice pale blue iris. And I think because of that, when I was a medic, I desperately needed to go on holiday and be in touch with sites like this, because the sort of white coat sterility of a hospital which I love very much, but I needed to sort of tap into this thing of nature and cultivated nature. And if any of you haven't been to the Scilly Isles, as well as the Hebrides, that's another really remarkably beautiful place if you're going to do a tour of the UK. And there, because they have this extraordinary microclimate, even though it's windy and there's salt wind, they have these very tiny fields with these dry stone walls and hedges. And so they can actually start getting highly scented narcissus, like this variety called Avalanche, in flower by November. Whereas even where I live in Sussex, they're not yet in flower. So they gain sort of 4 months. And so they can supply cut flowers right the way through the winter into the London market. And then things like this also I sort of yearned for as well as I was sort of commuting to the hospital. Fields, the idea of a field of peonies seemed to me to be one of the most lovely things. This is actually near me on the Kent-Sussex border. So Adam and I bought this ramshackle farm called Perch Hill Farm. And this was already actually when we'd done a little bit of improvement, but it was full of rather horrible concrete yards and very dilapidated, not in any way pretty or romantic buildings. A lot of asbestos, a lot of sort of rubbish from an ex-dairy farm. So we had to spend 2 or 3 years just sort of unpicking a lot of the rubbish. But gradually, we sort of started to breathe life, our sort of life back into it. We planted hedges everywhere because it's called Perch Hill and it is perched on the edge of a hill and very windy. But this is where I then decided to give up medicine and to start growing cut flowers full time. And there's sort of quite a nice story in the way how that came about is I went to a wedding of a friend of mine with Adam, and he sat next to a woman called Frances Lincoln, who was a publisher in the UK at the time. And he came out of the party and we got into the car and he said, "I've got you a book commissioned." And I said, "Really? But I'm a medic, I'm a doctor, I don't write books." He said, "No, don't worry, I'll help you write it. We've got to have a proposal in by Monday morning." And that was the cutting garden. And he did help me write it. I then had a baby and I then gave up medicine and I did that, so I was able to sort of make time for it. But really, the reason this had come about is I'd started to try I did a sort of weird job share once. I had one child. I had 6 weeks on in the hospital and 6 weeks off. Because for patient care, if you do half a week, then you admit a patient that you then don't look after for the second part of the week. So I decided to split it in a much more radical way with my job share person, who actually was a man who had glandular fever. Anyway, that's all detail. But so in the times when I wasn't in the hospital, I then started to write this book. And I very much was set on the idea that on our 90-acre ramshackle farm, I was going to have a field of peonies, like you saw, a field of euphorbias, a field of eryngiums, a field of heleniums, and a field of Phlox paniculata hybrids. Now, you're all gardeners, so you all know what all those plants are. But as I was working out I'm not very good at money, to be honest, but I was able to work out that the harvest from a peony, again, any of your gardeners will know, takes 3 years really to get to a decent size, to get a decent crop. It then only crops for 3 weeks in the year, so then the rest is fallow. It's quite expensive to put in. And so in terms of getting a bank loan or investment or whatever, it was just a complete and utter joke. So sadly, I carried on. I put the white coat back on. And euphorbia's slightly better. This is euphorbia my parents found in Rhodes called Ceratocarpa, which flowers sort of 11 months of the year. But I then, luckily, could take the white coat off because I discovered Cosmos Purity. Now, you all know Cosmos Purity, and you probably all knew it then. But the thing about Cosmos Purity is I could get, from a metre squared of peony, I could get 1 bucket per year. From a metre squared of Cosmos Purity, I could get 52 buckets in a year. And so immediately, as soon as I discovered it, just by doing these metre square patches, and then I found with a metre squared of certain varieties of Dahlia. This was the first one I fell in love with at Giverny in Monet's garden. I could get 30 buckets of cut flower per metre, and in the whole season. So I did lots of these little trial patches while I was still working as a medic. So these really small little patches, 4 by 12 foot, and I would put in them 8 different varieties and then measure quite relatively nerdishly and carefully, because I had a bit of a scientist medic in me, how many buckets I got. And so it turned out that from even just something like 12 by 4 foot, I was able to harvest on average 3 buckets of cut flower a week. So I didn't need a flower farm really to do what I wanted to do. And so in fact, I made a much smaller garden. I made a garden 150 foot by 170 foot. And that really was enough to supply me 50 buckets of cut flower every other weekend for an event. And I didn't want to work every weekend, so that sort of suited me fine. And this is really it. I was going to draw this up on the board, but I've sort of explained that really. And this is sort of the basis of the last 20 years of my life, is this thing of, if you've got a peony, they're wonderful, but it's half to 1 bucket in one whole season. And really with Cosmos Purity, if you just see the third line down, it's 50 to 60. Dahlia Rip City and Chat Noir, it's there as 60, but I think that's an exaggeration, but it's something like that. And this very ugly slide explains it all. That basically, if you pick live head or dead head, but having worked as a volunteer at Great Dexter when I was toying with the idea of giving up medicine, where I spent every single day of 2.5 months deadheading dahlias with earwigs, I really started thinking, why aren't they live-heading these dahlias? They're so beautiful. Why aren't they picking them? Why are they getting us to deadhead them? But of course, by live-heading or deadheading, what you do, if you take out the leader, you promote auxiliary bud formation. And so this ugly slide, you can see that there's next week's flower off to the left, and off to the right is the flower for the week after. And so if you pick any cut-and-come-again plant above a pair of leaves, you will promote auxiliary bud formation. So the last 20 years of my life really has been spent trying to find which are the annuals which give you this profile most prolifically, and which, increasingly now, I'm moving to tender perennials and perennials that will give you this to an extent. And they have this cut-and-come-again nature. So, of course, this is a zinnia, many of you will recognize. But by picking there where my scissors are, I am, again, promoting auxiliary bud formation. So I am perpetuating the harvest. So rather than like with a peony, I'm nicking the view, in this case, I'm actually perpetuating the view. So it really is an ever-filling cup. If you grow the right plants, it just keeps filling up. And so if you are, like me, an optimist, it is the perfect sort of gardening. But obviously, it's a bit more labor-intensive than just creating shrubs and shrubs and perennials, which you can just chuck in and ignore for the next 20 years of your life. But as we all know, gardening is very good for you. And so the fact that you actually have to garden is another plus point. So then, really quite easily, you can produce this if you want to. I mean, that may feel a bit overwhelming. The one thing that is overwhelming is you do need to keep picking. Because, of course, if you're not deadheading and you're not live-heading, then it will go over. It'll run to seed. These plants will run to seed. And so they will stop flowering. But that mustn't put you off, because you can just ring up your friend when you're bored of picking and say, will you please come and pick my garden? And you have to show them not to cut to the ground, because that wipes out productivity. So they have to cut to above a pair of leaves, and then they're doing you a favor, and you are loving them forever, and they're loving you forever. So again, it's gardening for the optimist. So you can easily pick great armfuls of flowers like this without it being in any way painful, and the more you pick, the more they flower. So that was sort of it is still the sort of foundation stone of what I do day to day. But I get bored quite easily, and so the next thing I wanted to do was to start trialing, because I didn't want to just be told what was the best narcissus with the best scent and the best vase life, or the best dahlia, or the best whatever. I wanted to find out for myself. So the next thing that I started doing with these trials, very amateur really, but I would measure how many buckets they would give me per square meter. I would put blindfolds on 10 people and put a bucket under their nose and then make them write down a mark out of 10, and then I would average it to get my cent scale. I would do exactly the same treatment for vase life. So with some I put bleach, with some I put sugar, and I would work out which had the best vase lives. And so the first big trial we did was the multi-headed narcissus. And so we just trialed 12 varieties. And we still grow most of those now, because actually a lot of them turned out to be terribly good. And tulips is another huge passion of mine, really. And so we grow about 120 different varieties every year. I go to Holland in the spring, and I go in the autumn to select dahlias. And looking at this, you think they all look pretty hideous. But there will be some reason why I will have selected those from a trial field. And so then I order the bulbs in to plant in the autumn, and then in the spring I assess whether they go well with the collection that I'm wanting to put together, or whether, again, they just have a particularly good vase life, or perhaps they're scented, or they have some characteristic that I want. And this was a tulip that I fell on in a Dutch trial field just near the Keukenhof garden in Holland. And this totally reminded me of my parents' garden as a child. There used to be an almost black lily-flowered tulip. Again, those of you who are gardeners will know the lily-flowered are these pointy, elegant ones. But whenever I bought the tulip called Burgundy, it was purple. It might open like this, but it gradually turned purple. And I didn't want purple, I wanted black. So I fell on this one, and this is now called Sarah Raven, this tulip. Because I saved it from the bin, because what happens is that these trial fields are full of thousands of varieties, and unless somebody goes and voices an interest, or unless they get selected, normally by the same 12 men who walk the fields, men in the audience, tend to like red and yellow and rather sort of chunky varieties. And that is incredibly binary of me, but they had walked past this beautiful black tulip many times. So luckily, I saved this one, and it's now called Sarah Raven. Anyway, so then on with more trialing. I've always loved old-fashioned wallflowers because they smell so fantastic. And so this was when I first put in the cutting garden. You can see that because the hedges are hardly grown up. But this was a trial that we did much more recently, which is the old-fashioned blood red, Erissimum blood red and Erissimum fire king are on the left there. And this new series called the Sunset series are on the right. And these were treated in exactly the same way. And this is why even amateur garden trials are just so useful, because you can see from that immediately that one is just barn door different to another. And that's basically why, is that they appear to have some resistance to the flea beetle, which is this little beetle that hops like a flea. And you'll know this beetle. You probably have it here. Do you have it here? Because of your rocket. It peppers your salad rocket, your arugula, with lots of tiny holes. But the new series are called, this is Sunset Apricot, which is a beautiful colour. You can see it. It goes from this pure apricot to sort of peach in the background, and somehow they harmonise really well together. And this is the different sunset colours. And then this is Sunset Purple, which you can see got a bit more of the flea beetle, but flowers much longer. And, you know, it isn't always true that new varieties are better. Not at all, which is why it's always worth trialling. But certainly in that case, they were very, very good. And I get involved quite a lot with other people's trials. This is a garden about an hour from me called Parham. We worked together on deciding on different trials from one year to the next. And we did a big allium trial there this last May. And they grew every single allium available. And then again, we assessed for vase life and border. The thing about alliums, as I'm sure you know, is that the foliage dies back very inelegantly. So that was one of the main things we were looking at. English garden pinks, so again, mainly assessing on length of flowering, vase life, and strength of perfume. And this again is at Parham. So we did a florist sweet pea, the so-called Spencer varieties of sweet pea, 80 or so, I think, different varieties. There's another whole lot on the back of that board, so there was 100. And again, so we went and assessed those every 2 or 3 weeks. and then made selections. This is what we call our Aegean Sea mix, which is a bit naff really, but there we are. And then this is a Venetian stained glass mix. And can you see those length of stems? And yet they have good scent. So that's really what we were looking for. And then I'm a great champion of the vulgar gladiolus. I like vulgar flowers on the whole. I think good taste can be very drowning. And I think it's quite good to have some good sort of vulgar flowers. So this again is a big gladiolus trial at Parham. And this was the bounty on a pretty much a weekly basis from this incredible trial. And again, there we were looking for the same kind of things, really. But whether they died more elegantly, whether they put up a second flower spike, that kind of thing, as well as whether we like them. But I guess sort of perhaps the dahlia is the thing that I've trialled more than anything, apart from perhaps tulips. And so we're continually trialling. We've just, literally the day I left, 62 varieties came in, new varieties, 10 of each, so because you've got to give them a decent number to see how they've been, which we've put in we will be putting in a new dahlia garden. So quite big dahlia trials. This is the new dahlia garden, which our gardener actually calls Adam's garden, which is quite sweet because it's sort of, he designed it really, but it's a south-facing slope, not much design, but lots of dahlias. And very cottagey, very, very simple, with gladiolus planted through. And chrysanthemums too. I love to love the chrysanthemum, as everybody hates them. So what's the point of all this trialing? Well, that's really kind of the point was to educate. I have a mail order plant and seed company, which really has been what I do almost more than anything else now is, and so we do the trials and all the photography in the garden at Perch Hill now, and so it goes into these catalogues, and also it informs my teaching. Again, I would get very bored if I was just teaching how to grow cut flowers all the time, which I love, but I have to keep interested, and I only can keep interested if I'm trialing new things. So the next section I just wanted to move on to is just a few of my really favourite plants, which I think perhaps some of you won't be growing for picking. There are one or two in there that you probably do know, but I just have put very few, I think maybe 10, that I think it'd be great if everybody was growing. So you probably know what this plant is. Can anyone identify the white plant here? Say again? It's not phlox. No, it's not actually, but it could be. It's not Hesperus matronalis. A good indicator is what it's being arranged with. So it's very early to flower, which is why it's so useful. It's white honesty, Lunaria annua alba. And it's one of those things that I was doing a wedding and I hadn't bought enough stuff. And I was completely panicked and completely stressed. And it's always the most creative moment then, because I went into my hedges and started just picking everything. And of course I had purple and white honesty self-seeded into my hedges. And I found that it lasted 10 days in the vase if you sear the stem ends in boiling water for 10 seconds. And it's now one of the things that we grow in biggest quantity, really, in the spring, because it's cut and come again, and so it's pretty much free. Whereas, of course, tulips, they don't come again, do they? So they're not free. And we actually now grow almost equal quantities of the purple for the stronger saturated arrangements. And it's just the most brilliant filler. So Lunaria annua alba. And another plant that, again, some of you will probably know, which I started to grow purely for the pollinators, is called Cerinthe major purpurescens honeywort. And again, if you sear the stem ends of that, this is a hellebore, which you do the same. So this is a Moroccan tea glass, so it holds boiling water. So if you sear the stem ends for 10 seconds, it makes a huge difference for these things that tend to flop, because it increases the surface area for water absorption. So it makes a huge difference to how long they last. And I'm sure some of you will be growing euphorbias, but an awful lot of people are very wary of picking euphorbias because of the sap. I pick euphorbias every day of my life, pretty much, and I am allergic to them. But I pick them with gloves on, and I sear them. And as long as I do that, and I try not to do this too much, then it's fine. And once they're in the vase, they're the most brilliant thing. And this is Euphorbia oblongata, which flowers for 9 months of the year and is about the most perfect, if you like strong colour, foliage plant, because it's like a plant sieve. You can just drop your other flowers into it, and it provides a sort of scaffolding for any arrangement. And it's grown from seeds, so it's cheap as chips. So it's really a fantastic plant. So that's Cerinthe and Euphorbia and the calendulas, which you will all know. That's a variety called Indian Prince. But all these, if I sow quite early, so for you it would be now, because I can overwinter stuff, but most of you can't do that. But if you sow that now, you will have flower in 10 to 12 weeks. I mean, it's one of the quickest trios from seed to flower. And there are very nice breeding going on at the moment with calendulas, making them softer. This is a variety called Sunset Buff. And that's it. So it's sort of gentle, beautiful colours. And then I'm sure you all know and grow the umbels, but I had to put this in because Ami Majus is just the most fantastic plant. This is when one of the gardeners got married in the garden. We did this Ami globe. And that's Ami Majus. So it's not Queen Anne's lace. It's another similar plant, but has much better vase life and more delicate. And there we often intersert with the annual scabious, which flowers for 6 months of the year. So that's Scabiosa atropurpura tall double mix. And then Orlea, which I first saw in Crete also, and you can in the lanes in Crete. And up into the hills, you'll see Orlea already flowering by the end of March, which is completely brilliant, because then you know, if I see something like that on a holiday, I'll know that if I sow that in the autumn, it will then flower in spring. And that, for me, is invaluable, because if you can get plant material early, then it's just like the white honesty. That's when you've got a dearth of stuff as fillers. And so Orlea grandiflora is just so good, because it is really hardy. Cosmos, I couldn't do a talk without good old Cosmos purity, and we intersow it, just direct sow it quite often now en masse with Ami Majus, and then that's Cosmos Dazzler. But my new favourite is this one, which is called Cosmos Rubenza, and it's very healthy, very floriferous, and this very dark, rich, rather nicer, I think, crimson. The Rebecchias also. They flower really from August until, with us, November. So here it would be a bit shorter. But this is one called Cherry Brandy, which I pick a lot. But this is a new one, which I'm sure you probably, lots of you know already, called the Sahara Mix. And you get this beautiful combination of colours, including the sort of milky coffee colour, which is so nice. And then my current obsession is with tender perennials or annual climbers, because I just love the whole sort of relaxed curtain flowing out of a vase look, which Sarah here has really got us all into. She's responsible for it largely, as well as, of course, the Dutch old masters, perhaps a little bit. But this is Cobaea scandens, the cup and saucer plant, which, again, if you sear the stem ends in boiling water, this lasts fantastically well in a vase. And you've got to pick the tendrils, too. So this is Cobaea scandens alba, and then just the normal species. So the cup and saucer, it looks just like a cup sitting on a saucer. So can you see that? It looks like a little delicate cup. But the tendrils are as important as anything. And this is rhodochyton, which this purple bell vine, growing with Tumbergia, African sunset. And I now pick those very long and late in the season. And we actually grow them in containers on these silver birch teepees and bring them into the greenhouse so we can go on picking them through the winter. Because these are actually perennial, but they will get cut down by the frosts. But they will keep flowering otherwise. And they've got this fantastic shapes, which just looks so great, cascading out of a vase. and that's a new phlox called Cherry Brandy, which is sort of superseding Creme Brulee, which is a brand new one. But this actually is more floriferous, there with Tumbergia African Sunset. And then I'm not going to show you countless grasses, because I'm not a massive grass fanatic, actually, because I think you've got to be careful with flower arrangements that they don't look like that sort of what I think of as the English pub fireplace arrangement. And that sort of dried grass thing. But this one is an exception. This is called Panicum Frosted Explosion. And it just is so good in a container because it looks like spun sugar in a sort of patisserie. And it just gives this, and it goes on, and it's one of the very, very few grasses that's cut and come again. So it's not, most grains aren't, they just have one flowering and then you take the grain. But this grass grain is cut and come again. And it's beautiful cut too. And then we couldn't finish without zinnias. This is a new zinnia bred here, actually, called Benari's Giant Lime. And in our trials, is every time totally supersedes Zinnia Envy, and I just passionately recommend this variety. It's much more robust and doesn't get botrytis, which the others can. And then this is the very trendy one called Queen Red Lime, and these are the two together, and you just get this very nice smoky mix of colours. And these are both very good new robust varieties that are very floriferous. And then really the last group of plants that I wanted to talk about before giving you a few practical things are the dahlias. This is a dahlia arrangement that I made 15 years ago, and to be honest, I probably wouldn't make this now, in that I still completely love that and it lifts my heart, but it's rather too strong colour for my taste now. The zeitgeist has changed, and I've always thought I had my own taste and that no one influenced my taste, but of course that's a load of rubbish. So this was very much, I still love this, but I actually find I move more towards slightly softer colours. This is another annual climber, which you grow much more here than we do, actually. Cardiospermum, Love in a Puff, and it's called Love in a Puff because the seed inside the puff is black, but with a white stenciled perfect heart on the side. That is why it's Love in a Puff. So this is sort of more the kind of colour palettes that we're going for. This you wouldn't notice in a trial field, and I have walked past this, but I must have selected it to bring it back. But this just totally stood out in our vase life trial, because most dahlias only give you 3 to 5 days of vase life, and this gives you 10. And I don't know why. It just does. And so it's got incredible longevity. It's called Dark Butterfly, and that's it arranged with another of the Tumbergias, Pink Susie. And then this is a brand new one that was bred in Holland 3 years ago, called Julie 1. It's a progeny of Just Julie and Jescott Julie, and it's a beautiful one. This is Labyrinth, and this is what I mean about my taste changing. I absolutely hated this colour only 5 years ago, and now this is my favourite dahlia, really. And here it is with Totally Tangerine, which is one of the brand new varieties, newly bred family, which are the anemone flowered dahlias. And I really remember seeing an anemone flowered dahlia in a trial field 7 years ago and saying to my friend, "Isn't that the most hideous thing you've ever seen?" So I'm a total hypocrite. But I still like these simple single species like ones. This is called Honka Fragile. And again, looking at it, you'd think it was fragile, but this has a vase life of a week. So, it sort of doesn't look like it would, but it does. And again, you only know that from trialing. I'm going to pass over this one so quickly because we're all bored to tears of Café au lait, but it is rather splendid in a way. So that's Dahlia Café au lait on the right. And what you get is these incredible, huge flowers in this extraordinary mix of colours, from coffee to pink to ivory. And they really are vast, because this vase is 2 foot tall. So you can see the cafe au lait in there with zinnia queen red lime. And, I mean, this colour honestly would have made me turn in 10 graves so recently. Linda's Baby, one of my favourites last year. And this one also just completely wonderful, Babylon Bronze. And actually I trialled this 10 years ago and binned it, but it's one of my favourites. And then Tahoma Moonshot. So again, some of the singles are so good because they're so architectural. And we all have to remember it's really important to have bad taste. And to have these really bad sort of punk hairdo weirdos in your flower arrangements is very, very important. And, you know, it can't all be about taupe and grey linen. And this one is called Holly Hill Spider Woman. And that is with Adam would turn in his grave because these are fake tea lights, but they don't burn the flowers. And when we're doing stuff, sometimes we can't burn the flowers. But that other one, which is beyond vulgar, is called Tartan, and that's splendid. And this one is really beyond. A great friend of mine called Arthur Parkinson selected this in a Dahlia trial field, and only he could have, because the flowers are the size of my head. And that is called Emery Paul, and it's crazy. So just to finish, a few practical things. So if you're going to grow cut-and-come-again plants, you must pinch them out. If in doubt, pinch out. Because what you do is you stop all the hormones reaching upwards. All the growth hormone of the plant is in the tip. If you pinch it out, it shocks it, and then the growth hormone accumulates in the roots, and it puts out roots. So it is just simple plant physiology. And once it's put out its roots, it then puts out its side shoots. So if in doubt, pinch out. With all annuals, you want to pinch them out, really. So that's a sweet pea, and that's the sweet pea taken 3 weeks later. And this is the thing that people find more surprising. This is a sunflower, and this is already 14 inches tall. And it's got, at that moment, it has 4 pairs of leaves. And you think, well, it's so wimpy, how can I possibly pinch it out? But you must, and you will then get this scar, and you will literally multiply the productivity of that plant by about 8 to 10 times, because it will then branch, and you get a shorter plant, but you get a much more productive plant. So you can see that there. And it applies really across the board. This is a Cerinthe, which has a tendency, particularly from sowing early, to just put up 1 shoot or 2, and if you pinch it out, you can see all those auxiliary buds forming. And even Cosmos at this stage, if I'm sending seedlings out in the post, I will pinch them rather than send them if I know that they're going to be particularly neglected for a little bit. It's much better to cut them back like this. So again, the plant hormones go down into the root. And then the other thing that we do to save a lot of time in the garden, because we're growing such huge number of sort of small numbers of a huge variety of things, is that we use gutter pipes for a lot of our sowing. And so we sow into these gutters, which we don't block the ends. And these actually happen to be salads, so we do all our salads in the same way. No drainage holes, and you don't block the ends. I used to put drainage holes and block the ends, but then I thought, I just won't bother to block the ends, and I don't need the holes. So I'm always about trying to save time. And then what you must do is to go back to them once they've germinated, and you need to then thin so that you can get your hand between plant 1 and plant 2. Because you're not sliding these out in a oneer, you're basically treating them like a glorified seed tray. So you push plant 1 out, then you move 12 inches along, another one out, another one out. So this will be doing a 40-foot row, one of those gutters. Do you see what I mean? So they're not staying in that position, but you need to be able to get your hand between plant 1 and plant 2 and plant 3, and so on. And then the other thing that we do to try and get more out of our ground, rather than going out into more fields, we try and go down. And one of the things that we've been doing quite a lot of experimenting with is lasagna planting. And so I started doing this with tulips, and winter hardy lettuce. And so this is just green salad bowl, which I know you won't be able to have that right through the winter, but you can start sowing that now. And so these are overplanting the tulips, so the tulips then come up through them. And so we then get a double harvest from the same square footage. This was one of my favourite combinations, which is red giant mustard, which is that very peppery mustard, which we use a lot in the kitchen for soups because it's like horseradish. And this is a bizarre tulip called Boa Vista. And what we've found about tulips that are green is that they have 3 times the vase life and 3 times the flowering life in the garden, because basically their petals are like leaves. And so they have this, they're quite expensive currently. And they're rather bizarre looking. They look more like artichokes, but they literally will last 3 to 4 weeks in a vase. So this is how you do it. So I garden on very heavy clay, and so I'm putting grit into the bottom, and then I'm putting my bulbs, and then I'm overplanting the salad seedlings over the top of them. So I'm just getting that double thing. And so things like Mitsuna, which will grow in snow. I know you have it harder here, but I know you had snow on Sunday, but so did we. And but you might not have quite as deep snow, I know, but it's still worth trying. So Mitsuna is properly hardy, as is red giant mustard. And this is red frills mustard. And then the lettuces, I find the green salad bowl or oak leaf about the hardiest. And then this is a red salad bowl. And I actually find the parsley from Naples, called Giant of Napoli, is also extremely hardy and will survive the winter with us. And so then, just to finish off, we then moved from doing it just with the lettuce, which we now experimented. So you've seen this slide already. But what we then did the following year is we lifted all the narcissi that we wanted, and we planted them deep at 8 to 10 inches. And we then backfilled with a soil with a bit of grit mixed in. And then we planted dahlia tubers in the autumn after the narcissus had gone in over the top. And then we mulched the dahlia. Now, again, I know you're all going to say you can't leave your dahlias in, but anyway, this is how we do it. And so then those mounds are all insulating blankets for the dahlia tubers. And then up the narcissus come before the dahlia foliage and flowers need the space, and then up come the dahlias. So you can see the narcissus all through them. And so all these things, and so that is the same bed as the narcissus bed. So you get this double harvest. And we're experimenting and increasing with lots of different things in that way, of basically using bulbs as an understory. So this is not cut flowers, this is a container, but again, we do the same in our pots. So we do 2 layers of tulips topped off with one of the iris or crocus, and so you get more for your money, really. So that now is Perch Hill. So you can see the farmhouse and the barn are wrapped round with all these quite, highly productive gardens. But we only garden under 2 acres, so I know that's quite a lot, but it's not fields, it's not a whole farm, and we produce all the stuff. And it's small, so as I said, it's under 200 feet in both directions. We now do have another cutting garden and a dahlia trial garden, but, it's not vast. And so this is kind of, it's very much small patches of different things rather than acres of one thing, because I'm always wanting to experiment and try different things. So this is Adam took actually on a nice June morning, so it's all looking slightly tidier than it was when we arrived. And roses is the new thing that we're doing, a huge rose trial this year. This is our rose garden, but we've also got some lined up. And then I was just going to finish on Chelsea. So this was a colour cutting garden that I did at Chelsea, just a small garden, and it was great fun to do. We were given 6 weeks to, we were told we were doing it in the middle of March. So we had, normally you have 6 months or even a year of preparation. But it was much better that way because we just had to get on and crack on and do it. And so it was sort of like a mini Perch Hill in the middle of Chelsea, and good fun doing it. And that's sort of what it looked like at the Chelsea Flower Show. So it was a little bit of Perch Hill in a strange place. Great. So thank you very much. That is.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm sure we have some questions.
Not finished yet.
Well, could you poll the audience? I've tried Wallflowers not a million times, but several times and with no luck. Does anyone in the audience ever grow Wallflowers with success?
Has anyone grown Wallflowers with any success? I mean, the thing is that you've got to overwinter them, and I guess that's the problem, isn't it? Yeah.
They go into cold frames at Wave Hill.
You definitely could, because they're biennial. So you definitely could if you had a glasshouse, just to keep, or even a polytunnel or whatever, but they're biennial, and they do genuinely need 8, 9, 10 months, ideally, from... Yes. Sorry. I probably have... caused too much frustration of showing you things. But I think most of the things that you can grow here.
So I see you trialing all sorts of things, a lot of bulbs, a lot of narcissus and tulips and things. When you find things you don't like, do you just compost them?
Yes. Do you know, I have a head gardener who is such a chucker. Sometimes I go down to the compost heap and I find like a box ball. It's like, what's wrong with that poor box ball? She said, we didn't have room. Yew trees. Anyway, so she's worse than I am. But yeah, no, we are quite brutal because we have to be, partly because we've got to move on to the next season and the next trial. We're always bursting at the seams. And so, yes, so we sort of relatively rigorously assess things. And then if there's anything we don't like, it goes. And if we like it, we collect seed and sort of decide to do it, photograph it. Yeah. But yeah, we have to be, yeah.
I have a question regarding dahlias, and when you talk about 10-day lifespan in the vase, are you cutting just early in the morning, or are you putting them in a certain temperature of water? What's the best advice?
So I always pick in the afternoon, evening, and I leave them overnight, and I leave them somewhere cool and dark overnight. And I do use clear vinegar in the flower water, because by acidifying the water you decrease bacterial reproduction, and with dahlias particularly they have very soft stems, so they do get quite manky quite quickly, so distilled clear vinegar in drums we use quite a lot. Yeah, but searing stem ends, I don't actually do that with dahlias, but with almost everything else I sear the stem ends for 10 seconds, just a tenth of the stem height. And the amount of time you sear is proportional to the texture of the stem. So if it's woody, I give it 20 seconds, 30 seconds even with lilac, which is a famous flopper. If it's very soft like a bluebell, I'll give it 5 seconds. But the average is 10 seconds.
And just on another note, do you keep an electric teapot outside? How do you
We do. We have a huge sort of really funny old-fashioned kettle, and we have big tea urns. And if I'm teaching, we have big tea urns of boiling water all the time. I mean, it's a health and safety nightmare. I'm amazed that I haven't had some terrible disaster, but so far I haven't. But we do in all the classes. Everybody has a bucket of boiling water in front of them, and they're searing. Yeah.
Hi. When you say you have things that self-seed, but you're live heading, what do you do? Like towards the end of the season, not pick anymore and just let them go to seed?
We don't have self-seeding really. Unfortunately, I love self-seeding. If I had a purely ornamental, in my parents' garden, it was all self-seeding. Unfortunately, we have to use a lot of mulch because we just couldn't keep on top of everything without mulch. We don't actually use Mypex, the fabric, but we do use 1.5 inches of compost. As soon as we've planted out a row, they'll be mulched. So to be honest, we don't get much self-seeding. There are a few things that we'll self-seed and we'll dig them up and put them in a row, but it's not done like that. But so we collect seed, but we can't allow much self-seeding because it would just when Adam and I first moved to Perch Hill, it was May the 1st, and it was incredibly beautiful because the garden was entirely blue with forget-me-not, and the woods were entirely blue with bluebells. I then spent 4 years trying to get rid of the bloody forget-me-nots, So we can't do self-seeding really because of the weed aspect. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So when you collect seed, what do you wait till the end of the season?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we're sowing things all the time, so there will be seed of the hardy annuals ready to be harvested in June, July, and then we would tend to pick a whole plant and put it in a pillowcase or a cotton sack and hang it upside down and let the seed just drop down, because we used to clean all the seed and it's just too labour intensive to do it like that. So we're always trying to cut corners, cut time.
When you're sowing your seeds in those gutters, that didn't really look like seed mix. Do you use seed mix, or
Do you mean the compost?
Well, what do you sow most of your seeds in, I guess?
We use the cheapest non-peat-based compost. And again, we've done quite extensive trials of different seed material, and so have they in Monet's garden at Giverny, where they went from the most expensive with loam down to the cheapest, and it made not a jot of difference with annuals, because of course your annuals are only in there for 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So if you're growing perennials in a pot, you need to spend money on a good compost. But that whole stuff about seed compost and needing good stuff, and you get what you pay for, is a load of rubbish. In my experience with annuals, that is.
Any favorite peony petal tulips?
Yes, so the doubles. Certainly at the moment, La Belle Époque, which is again a bit of a cliche now, like Café au lait, but it's very beautiful. It's the colour of milky coffee with a bit of purple in it. And what's quite nice is some of the flowers are more single and some are more double. The good thing about the peony flowered varieties, which you've probably realised, is that the nectaries are bred to be petaloids. So they are sterile, which is not great for the pollinators, so you can't only grow them. But what that means is that they flower for twice as long than a single peony. So the thing about the peony flower varieties, which is why they're so fashionable with florists, is that they do flower for much longer. And they last longer in a vase. So I really like La Belle Époque. Actually, Deborah, who's here, introduced me to Black Hero, which is a very glossy black peony flowered one, which I also love. There's a very good dark red called Anthracite. I could reel off a few. There's a lovely white one called Dance Line that looks like a white peony. Oh, and there's a brand new one that's rather hideous in proportion, in that the stem's too short and the flower too big, but it looks exactly like a pink peony, which is called Pink Star. And it's only just been bred, but it'll be around soon. And that, honestly, you put it, I should have put a slide of it, and you put it by your bedside and it looks like a pink peony. It's got this massive flower. And it has got a different stamen, but as long as you don't see the stamen, you don't know it's not a peony.
You mentioned the species Ranunculus at the beginning of the talk, and I found that fascinating. And the butterfly Ranunculus is so popular right now, but it's so tall and difficult to grow. So what do you see developing there for the home garden market?
Yeah, the Ranunculus is a really difficult plant. I mean, when I bring a bag of Ranunculus back and hand them to Josie, our head gardener, she sort of hits me around the head with it, because they are so hard to grow without fungicide. And we are not sign-sealed organic, but we try and be organic. They get mildew and botrytis, they get everything. I do think that the species, the Ranunculus asiaticus, is something that I'm trying to grow from seed at the moment. And I don't see why it's not going to be more robust and easy. But it's not as showy, and it only comes in white. But I think that there will be development of that, because for the home grower, Ranunculus really are very hard. You really do need a chemical regime on a fortnightly basis to grow them well. And do we want to do that? Probably not. Now, Sarah has a question here in the front. She's put her hand up about 20 times.
I was going to ask you about peonies keep coming up in the talk, and you don't grow any. But people are so fascinated by peonies, and there is this romance around them. And just now, the tulips, which tulips look like peonies? Show me which ones those are. What do you think that is about the peony and that shape of flower that is just so desirable?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because to be honest, they have been the flower along with roses and perhaps sweet peas that have stayed with us. You know, they're fashionable now, but they were fashionable when I started 25 years ago. You know, whereas there are lots of other things that have come and gone. And I think it's that they are just so flowery. And a lot of them are scented. The one I showed you, Duchesse de Nemours, has got this beautiful scent of lily of the valley. It's absolutely amazing. But I just think they are just sort of like the kid's flower, you know. They're the thing that if you think of a flower, if you're about to die, it might be a peony. You know, they're just sort of so flowery. I can't think why else, but yeah. I'm sure you've got opinions about that.
I think they mark a time of the year, too. They don't bloom year-round. They mark that moment in spring that makes you remember.
It's quite amazing, really, because, you know, strawberries are the same, yet we've got strawberries that are... It's sort of amazing that peonies haven't been bred to have a longer season, isn't it? I always think that. But bearded iris and peonies are those things that are just transient. They come and then they go. And that is wonderful about them.
Do we have one more question before we sign books?
I just wanted to know, I know you do cookbooks a lot. Have you turned away from cookbooks? Do you have one on the horizon? Or what's your next book?
Well, good question, Steve. I'm going to do a gardening book next, but I'm really grappling because I've got so much to say. I don't quite know what it's going to be, but I think it's going to be very austere on the outside and very luscious on the inside. This is the idea that we had 2 days ago. I don't know. I proposed a book to my publisher after a holiday in Greece last summer, and he sort of, and I then had lunch with him, and I said, would you like, no, we talked about his book for an hour and a half that he was working on, and then I said, did you like my proposal? He said, Sarah, it's 2,000 pages. And he was kind of right. Anyway, so I've got to sort of trying to work out. I've got too much to say. Anyway, enough. I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you all.